Hello, my name is Alara. I want to tell you a story. It is not the story you will find in the old history books, the ones bound in leather, stamped with a golden crown. Those books tell a tale of kings, queens, empire, glory. My story is different. It is a story whispered on the docks, shared in hushed tones in crowded kitchens, finally shouted in the streets. It is the story of how the people, ordinary people like you and me, decided to take the crown for themselves. Not to wear it, you understand, but to melt it down. Forge something new, something that belonged to all of us, not just a chosen few. This is the story of the crowning service, the day we crowned ourselves with the duty of service. Our story begins not in a grand palace, but in the bustling, chaotic heart of the British Empire. It begins in a place where the crown's power was felt most keenly, and where the first seeds of a different kind of power began to grow. We must travel back in time, to a sun-drenched port in the Caribbean. The year is not important. What is important is the scene. The air is thick with the sweet, cloying smell of sugarcane and the salt of the sea. The sounds are a symphony of empire, creak of ships' timbers, crack of the overseer's whip, clang of chains, babble of 100 different tongues, all forced to speak the language of commerce and control. This is the world the crown built. A world of trade routes that stretched across oceans, connecting continents in a web of profit and pain. Let me place you right there, on the docks of Port Royal Bridgetown, Kingston. Imagine you are me, a young girl then, watching the world go by. I spent my childhood on these splintered wooden planks, watching the great ships arrive and depart. They were like floating castles, their masts reaching for the sky like skeletal fingers. They brought soldiers in red coats, officials with powdered wigs, letters bearing the royal seal. So we have these two powerful forces, existing in the same space but operating on entirely different principles. On one side, you have the crown, a system of hierarchy, a pyramid with the monarch at the very top. Power flows downwards, from the king to his ministers, to his governors, to his soldiers, to his tax collectors. We leave the sun-scorched docks of the Caribbean and cross the vast Atlantic. We sail on the very ships that carried sugar and cotton toward the metropole, Great Britain. This was the age of the Industrial Revolution. If the sugar plantation was the engine of the colonial economy, the textile mill was the engine of the Industrial Revolution in Britain. Well, these massive brick factories, described by the poet William Blake as dark, satanic mills, rose up across the landscapes of northern England. Section 1. The Gilded Cage, a monarchy in the modern age. Our story now advances into a future that felt, to many, just like the present. We arrive in the early years of the 21st century. The British monarchy, having survived the upheavals of the past, had settled into a new role. The final crisis did not begin with a political scandal, but with a quiet, relentless economic decay. The Britain of this era was a nation living on the memory of its past glories. The City of London had become the new empire, an empire of abstract money, of speculation, and of debt. After years of falling real-term wages and deteriorating conditions, the unions representing public sector workers decided they had had enough. Nurses, teachers, railway staff decided they had had enough. The government's next move was a desperate act of self-preservation that catastrophically backfired. The Prime Minister drove to Buckingham Palace in a final gambit. The plan: ask the King to make a direct appeal to the nation. The King faced an impossible choice. In a short, pre-recorded statement, filmed not in a grand stateroom but in a simple office, he announced that he was suspending the functions of the monarchy. He and his family would be withdrawing from public life and relinquishing all constitutional roles until the people decided a new form of government. Immediately following the broadcast, in the dead of night, the royal family left Buckingham Palace. A small convoy of unassuming cars with no police escort, slipped out of a side gate and headed for a private airport. The massive, ornate iron gates of the palace, for centuries a symbol of royal separation and power, were slowly swung open from the inside. There was a long, hesitant pause. Instead, people began to walk, almost reverently, through the gates and onto the gravel of the palace forecourt. While the high drama of the political standoff unfolded in London, the rest of the country was engaged in a quiet revolution. With the central government rendered irrelevant, a power vacuum had been created. Instead of the chaos and looting predicted by authorities, a new order began to emerge from the ground up. The networks of the Commons had been operating as a parallel support system for years. Now they stepped into the open and effectively became the local government. To create this new national body, it was decided that a constitutional convention would be held. The delegates who arrived in Birmingham were a true reflection of the nation. They gathered not in a grand, intimidating hall, but in a repurposed conference centre arranged in a circle so no one was at the head. They spent weeks hammering out the details of a new founding document, the People's Charter. The ceremony was deliberately called the crowning service, but its meaning was inverted. It was not about crowning a single person with power, but about celebrating the moment the people had collectively crowned themselves with the responsibility of self-governance. Every person present was invited to take a handful of earth from a small bowl passed among the crowd and to add it to a newly planted oak tree in the centre of the circle. At the very heart of the new People's Charter was a radical redefinition of the social contract. The new contract was participatory and active. It was based on the principle of voluntary service. Every citizen had a right to society's benefits and a responsibility to contribute according to their ability. Community kitchen work, maintaining a local park, mentoring a young person, volunteering in a care home, contributing skills to a national infrastructure project. Service became the new patriotism, action over flags, a radical experiment in civic engagement moving beyond voting to continuous, active citizenship, building a nation where citizen is a proud, meaningful role. Our story has been a long and winding one, a journey across centuries and oceans, sun-beaten docks of a Caribbean colony, the dawn of a new society in Britain. We began with a simple contrast, the rigid, hierarchical power of the crown, a pyramid built on extraction and obedience, and the resilient, networked power of the Commons, a web woven from threads of mutual aid and survival. It was the service of the neighbour sharing their food, the friendly society supporting a sick member, the striking nurses on the picket line fighting for a health service that could care for everyone. This was the service of solidarity. Our story ends with the birth of the People's Union, but it is, of course, an unfinished story. It is the idea that we can organise ourselves, care for one another, and build a just and beautiful world together. The future is not yet written. The story is, and always will be, yours to continue.